is extraordinarily common for the Harmon haters to try and tell people that everything I say has no substantial evidence to it, that I never provide sources, that the things I talk about don't happen. So this is a very blatant example of just how, if anything, I kind of understate how bad gaming journalism is, because this is a very stereotypical example as to what is actually happening with the gaming journalism sphere, especially from Europe, but, it occasionally makes its way over to America as well. But it is insane how desperate these people are to, downplay Nintendo. And there have been, dozens of examples over this. I've barely even, scratched the surface on this channel. But this is a very good example of how gaming journalists try and misrepresent what the executives at Nintendo say. Because 10 years ago, well, more like 15, 15 years ago, people used to take everything these people said as the gospel, that these are our guys, these are the game journals with the boots on the ground, they're holding these developers accountable, they're gamers, they know what's up. The reality is quite a bit different. They are failed journalists. They don't care about games, they don't care about the industry, they don't care about the developers or the publishing industry or the fans. All they want is attention. They obsess over trying to ruin the reputation of a beloved company like Nintendo. And this is a really good example of that. Eurogamer says, Nintendo president says children should engage with its characters elsewhere if they can't afford a Switch 2. And this was even community noted, but we'll ignore that because that's often kind of unreliable. But yeah, so this guy, do not argue with. Well, I mean, a number of people pointed this out immediately, but what Furukawa actually said was, it is true that Nintendo Switch has a higher price point than our past gaming systems. We are creating various opportunities outside of our gaming systems for young children to engage with Nintendo characters and game worlds, with one of the ultimate goals being that they will eventually play on our gaming systems. We are closely monitoring to what degree the price of the system might become a barrier. So, completely different sentence, right? This is a very, very clear example of the industry desperately trying to rewrite what Nintendo said, because it is true that the Switch 2 is more expensive than previous Nintendo consoles, but clearly that was the right move to make, because clearly the consoles are selling, clearly the games are doing well, clearly Nintendo knows what they're doing, and they are paying attention to the numbers. If the price point became an issue for younger players, they would take that into account for what they produce next. They could probably put together a budget Switch 2 like they did with the Switch Lite. There's all manner of things they could do. But the important thing to take away from this is that Eurogamer completely misrepresented what was said to try and push this narrative. Oh man, Nintendo says children should engage with its characters elsewhere if they can't afford a Switch 2. It's just obviously misrepresenting what the company actually said and what their actual goals are and what their actual business strategy is. This is why there's such a weird contrast between Nintendo being this exceedingly well-run Japanese company versus the media mainstream presentation of them, where they're constantly failing and constantly going bankrupt and constantly losing out to Xbox, PlayStation, and the third parties, even though that all of them are going bankrupt now. People are talking about the gaming crash and unironically are ignoring the fact that Nintendo is completely fine, is not only going to survive, but is essentially going to dominate and going to be the major player going forward. PlayStation and Xbox are going to take huge blows over the next generation. Actually, Xbox, I think, is already out of the console race at this stage. I think with what recent happenings have occurred, but keep in mind, what was the last decade of Xbox life? Phil Spencer was hyped up as the savior of Xbox. He was our guy. He played all these games. He promoted Battletoads. He did all this stuff. Oh man, Perfect Dark's gonna be a quadruple A game. He was pushing Game Pass. He was doing all these things. Game Pass was supposed to be this huge milestone gaming. As recently as last week, People were saying Xbox Game Pass was this phenomenal deal and this really shining example as to like a consumer friendly business model in the gaming industry. And what happens? Xbox just fires everyone. They're clearly not competitive. Like, if you like Indiana Jones or like, anything else they produce, or Hi-Fi Rush or anything else they've done over the past couple of years, too bad. Like, everyone's fired with absolutely no hope of recovery. They bungled Rareware, the greatest developer of the 90s. Like, isn't that a testament to how incompetent Microsoft is? But like, who do you know who will like actually address that fact? Who will address like it's kind of crazy like when you compare these like weird clickbaity Nintendo like conspiracies versus like the reality of how like Xbox is the failing brand. Xbox can't survive, how it's not popular at all. And meanwhile, you have like people who like genuinely believe that like the PS2 was some major milestone like gaming platform that far outperformed the GameCube. Like in reality, the GameCube was far more popular. That was the game that people actually played and stuck with and remembered, and that's like a very clearly observable fact today. Xbox and PlayStation are and always have been brands for casuals who only want to play Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, and Madden. Like, that's it. It is the normie audience. Like, the most transparent, like, broken, like, just brain dead audience. When it comes to, like, actual video games that actually advance the medium and actually, like, establish their own creative characters and worlds, like, the real artistry of video games, like, Nintendo has been, like, untouchable forever, for the past 45 years. And it's just been this like insane cope, for all of that time about like, how they didn't really save the video game industry after the Atari crash, because like, oh, that was only in America, never mind that Nintendo, America is one of Nintendo's biggest markets, never mind the success of like games like Donkey Kong Country or the Wii or like the Switch. All of that has been downplayed. And yet, like, we are seriously meant to believe, according to game journals, that Xbox was this like serious competitor in the gaming sphere when they have like accomplished absolutely nothing in their entire existence. Like, this is my problem with video game journalism. Like, it has nothing to do with the politics. It has nothing to do with like their coverage of games or like anything. Like, there is just this complete refusal from anybody to acknowledge the fact that Nintendo is dominating the gaming market. Like, there is just no accountability on that specific issue, and it is the primary reason why we as Nintendo fans really, really, really need to tell like Xbox, PC, and PlayStation fans that they're complete plebs and have no idea what they're talking about. It's shocking how something like Breath of the Wild, one game, is like worth more than like the entire backlog of games on Steam. Every single one. There isn't a single one that even comes close to what Breath of the Wild accomplishes. And that game got a sequel. There are other Nintendo games that they released. So, like, why would you ever bother with Xbox, PlayStation, and PC unless you were a turbo casual who just wanted to play COD? If you're that kind of person, you shouldn't be having like these conversations about like gaming platforms anyway. Like, you don't know anything about them. And that's just the core of the issue. Every single time this happens, these people demonstrate their ignorance as to like what people actually like and play.